In the summer of 1969, the most powerful rocket ever built lifted 3 men off the surface of the Earth and carried them toward the Moon. 100 million people watched. It was the defining achievement of American science, the crowning triumph of a nation. The man who designed that rocket had spent the previous decade carefully reinventing his past. Before NASA, there was the SS. Before the Saturn V, there was the V.2. And before the Apollo program, there was a program built on the concentration camp prisoners. This is Operation It was 1937. Germany was rearming at a pace that alarmed the world, and a young engineer with a talent for rocketry had just joined 2 of the most powerful organizations in the Reich, the Nazi Party and the SS. Von Braun would later claim that both memberships were forced upon him, that he had no choice, that he was a scientist, not a soldier. The records tell a different story. At Peenemünde, on the Baltic coast, von Braun led a team of engineers developing what would become the world's first ballistic missile, the V-2 rocket. It stood 14 meters tall, weighed 13 tons, and carried a 1-ton warhead at speeds no aircraft could intercept. Between September 1944 and the end of the war, more than 3,000 V-2 rockets fell on London, Antwerp, and Paris. Nearly 9,000 people died. The V-2 was a weapon of terror. It arrived without warning. There was no air raid siren, no sound of approaching engines. Only the explosion, and then, seconds later, the sound of something that had already killed you. Von Braun was celebrated within the Reich for this achievement. Photographs show him in his SS uniform, shaking hands with Heinrich Himmler himself. But building the V-2 required more than engineering brilliance. It required labor. And by 1943, Germany was running out of willing workers. The solution came in the form of Dora, a concentration camp carved into the Harz Mountains of central Germany. Tens of thousands of prisoners were transported there, drawn from camps across occupied Europe. Jews, political prisoners, Soviet POWs. They were taken underground, into a network of tunnels blasted through limestone and put to work assembling rockets in near darkness. The conditions at Mittelwerk were designed to kill slowly. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts without adequate food or water. The tunnels were not ventilated. Chalk dust filled their lungs. Bodies were removed daily. When workers were judged too weak to continue, they were executed, sometimes hanged from the factory cranes in full view of the remaining workforce as a warning. Over 20,000 prisoners died at Dora and Mittelwerk. More people died building the V-2 than were killed by it. Von Braun visited Mittelwerk. He selected prisoners for skilled work. He was not a distant administrator who looked the other way. He was present. The testimony of survivors would establish this in the decades that followed. Officially, he was an engineer building rockets. In reality, he was a beneficiary of one of the Reich's most lethal slave labor programs. By early 1945, the war was ending. The Red Army was advancing from the east. Allied forces were closing from the west, and both sides understood something the public did not. Germany's scientists represented a strategic resource unlike anything else on the battlefield. American advisors estimated that German science had placed the Reich a decade ahead of the Allies in certain fields. Rocketry, chemical weapons, aviation, nuclear research. The Soviet Union moved first, dispatching dedicated units to capture German scientists and their technical documents. The Americans responded with Operation Overcast, a program to identify and extract German expertise before it fell into Soviet hands. Von Braun had already made his decision. He ordered his team to surrender to American forces. He was captured in the Austrian Alps in May 1945, along with hundreds of his engineers and over 14 tons of technical documents he had hidden in an abandoned mine shaft. He was 33 years old. The Americans brought him in from the cold. The program that would employ him had not yet been named. That would come later, when Pentagon officials began attaching paperclips to the files of scientists they wanted to recruit, a quiet way of flagging men for employment without formally noting their backgrounds in the official record. Operation Paperclip. The challenge was significant. Many of the scientists the Americans wanted were war criminals under their own definition. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency had explicit guidance from President Truman himself. No ardent Nazis, no war criminals were to be employed. The files were altered, security reports were rewritten, affiliations were omitted, von Braun's SS membership was classified, his visits to Mittelwerk went unmentioned. Across the program, the records of over 1,600 scientists were cleansed of any information that might have disqualified them from entering the United States. The men who had built weapons for Hitler arrived in America with new papers, new histories, and in many cases new names for the facilities where they were put to work. Officially, they were researchers serving the cause of American science. In reality, they were war criminals given immunity in exchange for expertise. Von Braun thrived. He became a celebrated figure, a face on the cover of Time magazine, technical director of the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, and eventually the chief architect of NASA's Saturn V rocket, the machine that carried Apollo 11 to the moon. He spoke eloquently about the future of space exploration. He appeared on television. He was photographed with presidents. The survivors of Dora were not photographed with presidents. Many spent the following decades attempting to have von Braun prosecuted. They submitted testimony. They contacted American authorities. They were ignored. The Cold War had made certain men too valuable to hold accountable. Von Braun died in 1977. He was never charged with any crime. The Saturn V remains one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. No one disputes that, but achievement and accountability are not opposites. What was built on those rockets, the triumph, the wonder, the collective memory of a species reaching beyond its world, was built by a man who stood in a tunnel in the Harz Mountains and said nothing. Operation Paperclip did not only import scientists, it imported a decision about what kind of crimes could be forgiven and what price was acceptable for victory. That decision was never put to a vote.